So welcome to section 5. And so here, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're using the kind of framing question of how does language construct race? And so we're building on kind of the previous discussion where we're thinking about how race is conflated with other things such as nation, such as positive or negative attributes, or such as beauty. And so again, so we're going to be thinking about we're going to look at some examples of linguistic descriptions and think about kind of what's really going on there, right? So what meanings are being signified, right? So what are the denotative meanings if we return to Bart? What are the connotative meanings? And what are the kind of mythic meanings that we can kind of find when we look at particular examples of linguistic social construction? So as you can see on screen, so there's portraits of 4 actresses. So we have Viola Davis, Charlize Theron, Julia Roberts, and Anne Hathaway. And so what I think is interesting, and so this is where we can kind of think about doing a semiotic analysis using the same source. So these are descriptions all taken from vogue.co.uk. So we have Viola Davis described as an African-American woman. Charlize Theron is described as a South African-American actress. Julia Roberts is described as having all-American glamour and being America's sweetheart. And Anne Hathaway is described as American. So here, this seems to be a description that's about more than just nationality, right? Because if we're thinking about just nationality, then Anne Hathaway and Julia Roberts would fit into that because they are American. They're American citizens. And Charlize Theron has dual nationality, right? So she's South African and American. But yet, Viola Davis is described as African American. And so Africa being a continent, so one cannot be a citizen of Africa, right? So this is about describing her racially. So here we either have the idea that Charlize Theron, Julia Roberts, and Anne Hathaway either don't need to be described in racial terms, or that the descriptors of South African and American stand as signifiers of whiteness in and of themselves. So depending on how we kind of read this, this tells us something about how sort of we can apply a semiotic reading to this, where Viola Davis described as African American, that we're being told something about her racial identity. Whereas with Charlize Theron, Julia Roberts, and Anne Hathaway, we're either explicitly being told something about their racial identity, if American or South African are stand-ins or signifiers for whiteness, or we're not being told about their race. So whichever way we read that or understand that, that tells us either how whiteness is understood as being kind of signified by particular sort of national identity and citizenship, so American or South African, or how whiteness actually doesn't need to be defined, doesn't need to be disclosed, right? So actually, Charlize Theron, Julia Roberts, and Anne Hathaway are arguably just being described in terms of nationality, and their race is nowhere to be seen. So again, we can kind of return to the question of how does language construct race, and you folks can kind of think about what is going on there, right? So how language might be constructing racial ideas and the ways that we understand the relationship between race and nation as well. So we see that African American is hyphenated. South African American has no hyphen in it. And so this tells us something also about how language kind of connotes particular meanings. And so folks interested in semiotic meaning have discussed the importance of the hyphen, or where there is a lack of a hyphen, what that might mean. So Toni Morrison notes that in this country, American means white. Everyone else has to hyphenate. And so again, if we think about the description of Viola Davis as African-American, whereas Charlize Theron is South African-American. There's no hyphen there. So again, this tells us something about kind of what that hyphen might mean. And again, if we're interested in sort of linguistic or semiotic meaning, when we think about the hyphen, we can think about it as being a kind of a moment of fragmentation, where it yokes together, in the case of African American, a continent and a nation. So it also puts those as kind of as though they are equals, whereas Africa as an incredibly large continent made up of 54 countries. Is it fair that that seems to be made equal by the hyphen to America, which is one singular nation? Also, the hyphen bonds the two together, but it also denies the ability of blending between the two, right? So African American are held as sort of distinct and cannot be blended, right? So that hyphen acts as a kind of barrier between the two. So again, we might think about kind of how sort of when we apply a semiotic lens, we understand how language constructs our ideas or understandings of race. And so if we think about kind of, again, in another way, how language might construct race, and also how that might be related to our ideas of nation, and how race and nation are often conflated or kind of constructed as kind of being constitutive of each other, right? The ways that American or even all American, whatever we think that might mean, are kind of understood to signify whiteness, whereas African American is to signify blackness. So we might think about how, not just sort of in American descriptions of famous people, but also how we might kind of describe or be encouraged or told to describe ourselves through other processes where language is important. These are some questions from the last census in the UK. So for question 15, respondents are being asked to kind of choose their ethnic group. Right, so here we have section A, which is white, made up of then these sort of subcategories of whiteness. So you can tick English, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish, or British. So those are all together. Or you can tick Irish separately, or you can tick Gypsy or Irish Traveller, or Roma, or any other white background. And again, note that respondents are being told to only tick one box, right? So again, this kind of linguistic construction of whiteness, what happens if somebody has mixed ethnicity, mixed white ethnicity, right? This census is telling people that they have to choose, right? So we're being forced into particular identities because of the way that kind of language is constructed and the way that language is constructing us. Similarly, if we look at section B, so this is mixed or multiple ethnic groups. So again, respondents have to tick one box, so either white and black Caribbean, or white and black African, white and Asian, or any other mixed or multiple background you can write in. So again, this doesn't give any kind of linguistic space and therefore kind of cultural space to people that have kind of broader mixed heritage than these questions allow for. So if we take those census questions as an example of the importance of language, right? So language as that which structures the ways that we understand the world, the ways that we talk about ourselves, whether it's to our friends, to our family, or the ways that we might have to describe or talk about ourselves through kind of governmental processes such as engaging with the census, such as filling out kind of information when you might apply for jobs. So thinking about kind of the importance that language has, because again, language doesn't just reflect race, or more broadly, doesn't just reflect reality, but also language constructs race and our understandings of it, and it constructs reality, therefore. So again, some kind of questions that I want to leave you with are, what does it mean to describe something as a social construct? How might we understand the world if we apply this social constructionist lens? What do constructions of blackness reveal? And also, how does language construct race? Thank you.